You're in the 06010. Focus. Fantasy Focus.
What's up? Welcome into Fantasy Focus Football, presented by NFL Sunday Ticket on YouTube TV. My name is Daniel Dopp, here with Field Yates in a really pretty flowered shirt.
Thank you. And you can see all of it today, Daniel, Liz, at least temporarily. For this show, I am going to be without a sling, which is a good development because slings are not exactly very comfortable. But for the next 2-ish weeks, you may see me without a sling until we go under the knife, and then back to sling life for quite some time.
Okay, all right, so we've made a decision. We know what's happening next. All right, I love that, though. We got a timeline. You're feeling good. I love seeing you have the arm out and free again, because I know how painful it was, just like being in one position, sticking there forever.
What's very bizarre about this, like mentally, is like just the idea that like I know like I have a long road ahead of me to get this thing back to where it was, and it is definitely not anywhere close to that. Like, it's painful, and there are certain things that I absolutely can't do. I can't pick up something right now, but it's weird how much like downward mobility I have right now with my, like, I can cut food right now, I can type, text, etc. So positive step forward. We're excited.
That's so good. Yeah. I'm actually really bummed because the reason, the way we were going to choose our draft order for one of our Fantasy Focus leagues was be doing an arm wrestling contest, and so I think
I am going to
be 12th.
Yeah, probably. Yeah. Or
left-handed.
I can go Tyson Bagent dad.
Ooh.
Right, who's the strongest, the best left-handed arm wrestler in the history of the universe.
I had no idea.
Yeah. So his story like kind of got some popularity in the pre-draft process before Bagent went undrafted last year. But then it was on Hard Knocks again a couple nights ago. So good Hard Knocks episode. We're getting down to the nitty-gritty here for Hard Knocks, and I am still always going to be a huge fan of that series and that show. I think the access is just really, really special.
Do you have a favorite arm wrestling movie, for what it's worth?
No.
You know of anyone?
No. What's
Sylvester Stallone had one called Over the Top.
Okay.
Remember that he was a truck driver with a kid he had this like move that he would do at the end with his thumb.
So I don't know if I recall that movie, but I feel like there's a meme that always goes around of a specific arm wrestler from a movie. Maybe that's from
Maybe
Over
that's
the Top.
what it is. Yeah,
it's very possible.
Maybe.
Yeah.
Anyways, we got a huge show set up today.
Yeah,
it's not about arm wrestling. We're not going to talk about that. We got a big mock draft that we did yesterday. I think you and I learned a lot in going through this 12-team mock draft. Maybe had some situations in which we weren't. We probably wouldn't do it a second time around, but this is why we mock draft.
Yes.
Once we look at our teams, we'll sort of explain where we're at with some of those situations. But we got some new stuff we got to talk about first. We got some more news on Jamar Chase, so let's just kick things off with the opening drive. First thing, let's start at the quarterback spot. I asked you yesterday, do you think Drake May is going to start for the Patriots? And you said, no, Daniel, I don't. And I got to tell you, you're as locked in as it gets, Field Yates. As the Patriots said, Jacoby Brissett is going to be the #1 starting quarterback against the Bengals week 1. I don't think we're drafting, unless you're in a very, very deep 2 or 3 quarterback league, Jacoby Brissett. But does this impact any of the skill position players for you in a positive or negative way? Or are you just as good with Brissett under center as you would be with Drake May?
I don't think so. I don't think this changes the outlook for me for any of the Patriots wide receivers because they were relatively far off the draft radar, as it were.
Right.
We've talked about both Pop Douglas and Jalen Polk as like very end of draft flyers. Me more optimistic on Polk, others more optimistic on Pop Douglas. I will say this, though. Things are looking really, really tough right now for the Patriots.
Yeah.
Like, this team definitely is in for a long, long season. The only thing that I have not totally been able to get rid of out of my mind is the idea that, like, this time last year, we all thought the Texans were going to really, 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 really struggle.
Yes, we did.
And it just takes one player, in the case of C.J. Stroud, to turn things around. And I think Drake May has enough talent that the tenor of the Patriots could sound a whole lot different at the end of this season. They might not win a ton of games, but you might feel better about the overall direction of the franchise because I do think Drake May will start at some point, and probably like in relative short order. Like if you told me by week 6 it was the Drake May show, I would be completely unsurprised. And as it pertains to fantasy football, as we get into those 16 bye weeks, if Drake is the guy, it might not be pretty, but it might be pretty effective in fantasy. So definitely in 2 quarterback leagues, I still think Drake May should be drafted and stashed. And even in single quarterback leagues that are a little bit deeper, like not an awful name to have on your draft radar as your backup quarterback, because I think he'll be the starter again relatively soon. And I think the upside's like kind of interesting because now on top of being a great athlete, he's a tank, right? I mean, he's not quite Josh Allen, Jalen Hurts level as a runner. We haven't seen that yet, but this guy's got the physical skill set to be a total game changer in fantasy football.
Yeah, I mean, I love the comparison, and I really hope it works out this way. Although it's not like Patriots fans need more success after the run they had. But I got C.J. Stroud in our Dynasty League last year with the 5th pick of our rookie draft, and I was like, dang it. I mean, Breece Hall, Anthony Richardson, Bijan Robinson. I was like, I guess I got to take C.J. Stroud. I don't feel good about it. And then it was like, this is the greatest pick ever.
I think it might have been Bryce Young ahead of him, too. Right?
Oh, you're right.
Yeah, because,
This is one of those things where it's, you never know what's going to happen. Obviously, C.J. Stroud just completely changed the fortunes of that Texans offense. I'd love to see it if Drake May could do that with all the things that you talked about that he's good at. All right, let's talk about Jamar Chase.
Oh, boy.
We brought it up real quick yesterday. There was a tweet, and we were talking about how...
We got to timestamp these conversations.
we really do. Zach Taylor was saying, like, yeah, I expect him to be ready for week 1. And then kind of backtracked a little bit. Ben Baby put out another tweet because Jamar Chase decided, I'm going to actually not practice tomorrow, which was yesterday, and has gone on to say he's day-to-day. Zach Taylor came out and said, I may have put my foot in my mouth when speaking yesterday about Chase's availability. Field, I asked you about that panic meter yesterday. Yeah. It was a green, yellow, or red, and we were hovering in between yellow and red before, okay, if we know he's going to be back for week 1, I'm much more in the green area. What does this new development do for us?
I've decided this. I'm yellow until I hear from Jamar himself.
Okay.
If Jamar comes out and says, hey, I worked really hard to get a new contract, it just didn't work out, I'm at peace with it, I'm playing this season, and I'm going to make more money after this year than I'm even asking for right now.
Right.
And I'm going to make them rue the decision to not pay me a year early.
Yep.
Then we'll go to green. But I admit, too, that like I took the cheese presented by
you weren't the only one.
The organization and thought, oh, yeah, we're good. And we'll talk about that more in the mock.
Yes, we will.
In just a little bit. I still think the floor for Jamar Chase, for those that are drafting right now, is towards the end of the first round because it's possible that if Jamar Chase misses a little bit of time at the beginning of the season and you had him for 13, 14 games, he could still pay off with like more value than if you go down to like wide receiver 10 or so, like 14 games of Jamar Chase might over the course of a season be more valuable than a full Devontae Adams, a full Chris Olave, a full Michael Pittman Jr. season.
Sure.
Because he has that much nuclear every single week upside.
Yeah, no, I'm with you on that. I think until I like the way that you say this. Until you hear from the player, we've heard enough from everyone other than the player, and the player is the one making the decision in this point, it seems like.
Yeah, and he needs to, it sounds like, it almost feels like he needs to choose a strategy. Like, because usually hold-ins only work if you don't show up to work and practice, right?
Now, I was told that when he was practicing, though, like even practicing, he was doing like individual drills off to the side. It's not like he's out there doing stuff with the team. Is that fair?
Correct, but he clearly gave some sort of impression about where things were headed because his own head coach was like, yeah, we're good for week 1.
Yeah, you wouldn't think that he would just come out of nowhere and say that without a reason to have those feelings.
Yeah, pick a negotiating strategy is what it seems like Jamar and his side need to do. You're either holding in until the deal is done, or you return to practice and you're saying, I'm practicing regardless of my contract status. I'll see you on the field at home for the season opener against the New England Patriots, 10 days from right now?
Yeah. All right, we're going to talk a little bit more Jamar Chase in just a minute. We'll save some of that for the mock draft. We also got Brandon Ayuk, another wide receiver that just needs to decide what he wants to do. I heard that the doctors cleared him, but he's still not out there practicing.
I didn't even know he was hurt, just for the record.
Not either.
I know, cleared. I was like, cleared him to get traded?
For
what
what?
did they clear him
know,
for?
Yeah.
The difference between Ayuk and Jamar Chase is the consequences, right? In the sense that you're taking Jamar Chase, excuse me, as early as like pick 6 in your draft. Ayuk has been going in terms of ADP somewhere closer to wide receiver 20, much closer to like, the 5th round turn, 4th, 5th turn.
Yep.
So obviously the stakes are different there.
Correct.
But with Ayuk, it's like there are, like in the case of Chase, there are only so many players that you can justify taking ahead of Jamar Chase because the potential upside dips so low.
Yeah.
In the case of Ayuk, there are several more than that, right? I'm not saying he should be undrafted, but it's crazy to me that Ayuk is not showing up, and yet he's still going earlier than T. Higgins, who's there. And by the way, might be the #1 wide receiver in a Joe Burrow offense 10 days from right now.
Exactly.
So I continue to feel like stock goes up a little bit for Deebo Samuel. Stock continues to kind of fluctuate for Brandon Ayuk. And here's what I would say. I just mentioned how Jamar Chase needs to choose a strategy.
Yep.
Brandon Ayuk needs to decide what he wants to do.
Yeah.
He just needs to decide. Does he want to be a San Francisco 49er? It's clear the team has presented him their best and final.
Yep.
Does he want to be a Pittsburgh Steeler? Does he want to go somewhere else? The 49ers have found several offers, right? Like, it's not just Pittsburgh. It was Cleveland. It was New England who were on the radar, right? The Patriots are the only known suitor to drop out of the Derby. But Ayuk has to decide what he wants to do. Until that happens, we're going to be doing these daily saga updates. And I'm starting to wonder whether we should even bother giving them breath anymore because it feels like we've been talking about updates for, I don't know, a month and a half and nothing's changed.
It's like you get so tired of talking about a thing that doesn't have any updates that it's like, we'll talk about it again when there's an update.
Right.
And what do you do for your drafts? But it's like, that's a great question. It's how bold do you feel? How far do you want to let them go? Everyone eventually, it seems like, becomes a value at some point.
Of course. Yep.
But the question is, I think that's very individualized for each person in the draft. You can have Brandon Ayuk at a different value and say, and I'm not saying that you're saying this, but you can be like, you know what? I'm just not going to draft him. If I don't know that he's going to play football for either the 49ers, if he goes to the Steelers, maybe that's it. I would draft him in a completely different spot, also given the attitude where everything has worked out.
If you went early on running backs, you went running back to start, you're probably not taking Brandon Ayuk at the beginning of your draft because he might be thrust into one of your top 2 wide receiver roles. If you started off with a world in which you got, depending on league size here, like A.J. Brown and Jahmyr Gibbs, you might say, I've got 2 massive upside players already in the cradle, and I can, Ayuk would only be my wide receiver 3, so I'll just take him, hope for the best. If I get him back soon, that would be an elite wide receiver 3. And then also, hey, I'm going to grab George Pickens or Amari Cooper a round or 2 later.
I'm not sure I would grab George Pickens and also draft Brandon Ayuk just because of the fear of them being on the same team. But I did totally with where you're at on that one. Let's talk about Malik Neighbors.
Yeah, let's do it.
You know the Giants unretired a number so that a rookie who hasn't even set foot on an NFL playing field can have that number. What does that say about what this franchise thinks about this kid they drafted?
I was going to say, Daniel, like when this news popped up yesterday, part of me was like, do we talk about this in the show, or is that like stretching it too far? And I don't think it is for this reason. Not that this like changed my rankings, all right? It is a much, much better number than number 9 for me.
Yes, agreed.
It's a massive upgrade. It looks
looks so much better.
It looks great.
Look at that.
It's just a testament to how special of a player this is. Now, granted, the new wide receiver rules only were instituted, new wide receiver number rules were only instituted, 2 seasons ago? So it's not like there have been other wide receivers that have come through and the Giants have denied them this opportunity, right? But still, unretiring a number that's been like from a guy that played 90 years ago is insane.
From an iconic franchise like the New York Football Giants.
In its 100th centennial season where pretty much everything is paying homage to what's already taken place up to this point. Pretty crazy. So I thought it was awesome. And you're wearing a jersey right now yourself.
I am wearing a jersey. I actually got this jersey in the mail. You know who's number 43 for the Detroit Lions?
43. That's got to be like a fullback or a safety, right?
That's a great thought, Field. But in fact, no, it's not. I did the UFL show this year.
Yeah, you did.
And my favorite UFL kicker for the Michigan Panthers was Jake Bates. And then guess what? He signed with my favorite NFL team, the Detroit Lions. And I said, it's time for me to put my money where my mouth is. I'm going to show you a clip really quickly that we're going to throw up from the UFL season, talking about me with Jake Bates and maybe getting a jersey of his. Kickers love kicking at Ford Field. If it was not for that field goal, longest in UFL history, obviously, would have been the second longest in NFL history since 1960, except for Justin Tucker, who also kicked an NFL long at Ford Field as well. So if you're a kicker, that's where you want to be kicking field goals, my friend. I'm telling you. I got to tell you, I went to NFLshop.com. Lions could use a kicker. Yeah. And I'm telling you right now, Jake, this jersey looks pretty good. I don't know. Jake Bates is still on the board. Lions kicker, guys. You know how big I am on this.
All right.
Honestly, we'll find out.
The shirt we play.
I told Jake Bates, I want you to come to Detroit. Look how good that jersey. He didn't have 38. It was already number on the team. But I wanted to go out there, put my money where my mouth is, and get myself a Jake Bates jersey.
It looks so good.
Which is exactly what I did, baby.
It looks awesome.
I love it.
By the way, 43, like kind of an awkward number for a kicker, and
yes,
he's going
to
own it.
I don't mind.
I don't mind it either. He's going to own the crap out of it.
Absolutely. I cannot wait to be able to have Jake be a part of this team for hopefully a very long time. But why not go out? I don't have any kicker jerseys, Field.
Yeah, is he your highest exposure player in fantasy this year?
He was the highest exposed
close,
player in our mock draft experience. That is for sure. Absolutely.
Hilarious.
Why not draft a kicker that can kick 65-yard bombs indoors when you've got 14 to 17 games indoors this year?
Can I make one last kicker comment? And it is a testament to Stephania Bell and her presence. Stephania Bell's influence is so real that I was in a draft last night, and actually the last two drafts that I've been in, and Brandon Aubrey is flying off the board super early.
Super early.
Like, I'm not talking like, hey, like round 13, like way earlier than that. I'm impressed. Like, people are buying what Stephania is selling, and while we've, in for many years believed, like, the patience is a virtue at kicker and defense, she has her stance that, like, it could be a decided edge, and frankly, it seems like a lot of people are on board with that. And if Aubrey crushes it again this year like he did last year, people will have no issue with having used an earlier round pick on the best kicker in fantasy football.
Yeah, it helps that Stephania is just a needle mover in life in general, right? Like, she says something and people listen. That's how it works.
Does.
So, yeah, I'm interested in trying to get Jake Bates up to that Brandon Aubrey area. Jake, love you, buddy. Hopefully we can make some things happen this year. All right. We got a mock draft that we did yesterday, Field, and that mock draft was a 12-team mock draft. Normally the mock drafts that we do here at ESPN Fantasy, we have 10-team standard leagues, but a lot of people in the industry play in 12-team leagues. So we often get the idea of like, hey, great that you do 10-team mocks. Why don't you do a 12-team mock? Because that's what my league actually is.
100%.
Field, I got to tell you, it's a little bit different. I learned a couple things doing this 12-team mock draft, and this is the point of doing mock drafts. You learn things here before you do them in your actual draft. We're going to go round by round. Take a look at every pick, and Field and I are going to break down why we went where we went so you guys can know what we did heading into the largest draft weekend of the season. Let's throw up the first round that we have here as a full screen. And you can see things kind of were pretty chalky in the first round. CMC, Breece Hall, Bijan Robinson, running back to start the draft, Field.
Man.
Then CeeDee Lamb, Jonathan Taylor at 5. That one was a surprise.
It was a surprise. It was from Not Cool Keith, and he is as good of a fantasy player as you will find. So there's probably logic behind it. But JT, normally the first 5 picks in the mocks that we have been doing, regardless of size, and other than Superflex leagues,
correct,
have been CMC, Breece Hall, Bijan Robinson, CeeDee Lamb, Tyreek Hill in some order. CMC at 1, and the rest of those guys 2 through 5. So JT going higher than I expected here. My guess is this: Keith picking at pick 5 in a 12-team league, acknowledging that if I don't pick a running back right now, I am not back on the clock until pick 20, and by then, the run of running backs that he likes best as potential RB1s is going to largely be over. Meanwhile, you can still get an elite potential wide receiver 1, which when we get to round 2, you will see where Keith landed there.
Absolutely.
I had the 9th pick, though, Daniel, and I was conflicted because yesterday I thought that Jamar Chase at pick 9 was of value.
Yeah.
And then, 20 minutes after the draft was over, we found out that Jamar Chase was not at practice. I've said, I said this earlier in the show, I think somewhere between 8, 9, maybe 10 at worst is the lowest that Jamar Chase deserves to go, even with this uncertainty because of the upside once he is back for, I imagine much of the season. But it did, my general stance on my draft changed about, 20 minutes after the draft.
After we got done with the draft.
But, I debated other wide receivers, certainly running back was in play as well. Your thoughts on pick number 12, because you had...
I got Garrett Wilson at 12. I was thrilled. By the way, you didn't have a chance to take either Justin Jefferson or Amon-Ra St. Brown because they both went before you. Yep. So, Jamar Chase was the clear guy there. I was thrilled to get Garrett Wilson at 12. I mean, I was kind of shocked, to be honest, that he made it that far. I thought I was going to have to choose, you had said it earlier, A.J. Brown or a Puka Nacua there in that spot. But being able to get Garrett Wilson, who was 4th in the NFL through his first 2 seasons in targets, Let's not worry about any of the other numbers. He had bad quarterback play. He was throwing the ball a bunch. He's going to get the ball a bunch again this year. I could not be more happy to get him at 12. I actually think that's really good value if you can get Garrett Wilson at the tail end of your first round there.
Keith did just send me a note and said that my guess of how he approached the draft was accurate. He thought that that running back that he could get at running back at pick 20 would not be as valuable as the wide receiver he'd get at pick 20. So he ended up going JT early, and we'll tell you about round 2 in just a moment here.
Yeah, I mean, well, he couldn't. There were a bunch of running backs that if he was going to wait, he wasn't going to be able to get, in part because in round 2, I took Jahmyr Gibbs.
Yeah.
First pick of the second round, going Garrett Wilson and Jahmyr Gibbs kind of fit the strategy that I've been going with. I want to get a top-tier running back and a top-tier wide receiver if I can help it, especially at the 12 pick in the first and second round. So being able to grab a guy that I'm going to start every single week in Jahmyr Gibbs that I think has a fantastic opportunity to crush it again this year, pairing him with Garrett Wilson, I couldn't have been happier with that start.
Yeah, it's two very, very, very high upside players.
Yeah.
Right? Like they both have a legit chance to be a top 3 finisher at their position. I mean, legit makes it seem a little bit stronger than my actual stances. But do you want to read round 2 here, Daniel?
I
we
do.
Can go through potential surprises that people may see.
Again, you talked about running backs that might not make it back to Keith if he didn't take JT. At 13 was me with Jahmyr Gibbs. 14 was Kyron Williams. 15, Isaiah Pacheco. 16, Travis Etienne. 17, Derrick Henry. And then we get to some of the wide receivers. Puka Nacua, Chris Olave, Marvin Harrison Jr., Alvin Kamara, Michael Pittman Jr., Nico Collins, and Devontae Adams rounding it out. But Field, you took one of those running backs and Travis Etienne with the 16th overall pick.
Yeah, and it was kind of him versus Derrick Henry, as I was thinking running back at that point. I chose Travis Etienne because of ageism. It's a joke. But, he and Henry and Pacheco kind of in a similar cluster there.
Yep.
Etienne obviously got this massive workload. It's not just a goal-to-go finisher last year, but also his receiving work in Jacksonville. The competition behind him hasn't changed meaningfully this year. Maybe Tank Bigsby sees a bit of a larger role, but Etienne locked into a very, very strong role in what should be a bounce-back good offense. I know that the end of last season has a bitter taste in the mouth of some as it pertains to the Jaguars, but they were humming to the first 11 weeks last year. They were 8-3. They were at the top of the AFC in terms of the standings, and Etienne was one of the best value picks in fantasy. The surprise to me in this round, I thought, Daniel, was Nico Collins going 23rd overall.
Really? Was that too early or too late?
No, I think it's a little bit earlier than I typically am seeing him. Not by a ton, but a little bit earlier.
I agree with that.
Not crazy, but I have seen a little bit more of like Mike Evans, Drake London going a little sooner than Nico Collins. Not a super reach, but again, there's not a lot of surprises. The surprises will pick up at some point in the draft, but relatively chalky so far.
All right, you mentioned those wide receivers. Let's talk about the third round of our mock draft. Heading into this, you mentioned it. Mike Evans, Drake London, James Cook, Malik Neighbors. I mean, you had a couple of wide receivers there. Malik Neighbors, by the way, coming off the board at the beginning of the third. I love being able to see that.
Yep.
Also have a couple of more running backs that come off shortly after that. Rashad White, Josh Jacobs. Josh Jacobs, I thought, was good value based on some of the news we got yesterday.
Yep.
Debo Samuel, Joe Mixon. And then you're back on the clock, Field.
I took DJ Moore from the Chicago Bears, coming off of a monster season, obviously, last year. Career high in catches, receiving yards, and touchdowns. I thought about, and did I think about the chance of him declining this year because of the other pieces around him? Sure. Did I think about a running back? I debated between him and Devon Achane at round 3.
Yep.
I was sort of thinking like the all-upside team, but Moore, just such a good player, playing with such a great quarterback now in Caleb Williams. I'm not sure that this is a particularly audacious pick one way or the other.
No, I don't think so either. Ken Walker and Devon Achane went right after that. You had talked about maybe thinking about running back. Because I had already grabbed Jahmyr Gibbs, I decided to go with DK Metcalf. Hopefully get a high upside wide receiver in an offense that I continue to think is going to be better this year than it was last year, be more pass heavy than it was last year. And hoping that both DK Metcalf and JSN, although here I only care about DK Metcalf, continue to be able to improve in this offense. Ryan Grubb coming over as the offensive coordinator now from University of Washington, and they just threw the ball a ton. They had a bunch of great wide receivers there. He knows how to be able to utilize the playmakers that he has, so I am looking at DK Metcalf as a guy, as my wide receiver too. If I get DK as my wide receiver too with where I'm at, I'm very, very pleased with that.
I thought maybe the best value pick here, and again, I mentioned I almost took him myself, but I think the best value pick, and it could blow up, is Devon Achane, right?
35.
Highest variance player in this round, right? We might look back and say, And ADP data suggests that 35 for Achane's pretty low. But we might look back and say, like, wow, like Devon Achane should have been a top 20 pick, right? Or we might look back and say, hey, he's so good on a per-touch basis. But if over the course of the season you only have 210 total touches, you have to be otherworldly every single year, and otherworldly is not easy to sustain.
Correct.
So I like the swing by Tristan Cockcroft on that pick here for Devon Achane. I would say this. He's on the list of players that will define the upcoming fantasy football season. Right, like more, it is players like Marvin Harrison and Malik Neighbors. It's going to skew rookies frequently because they're new.
Yep.
But it's also sometimes it's guys like going to new places, right? Whether it's Stephon Diggs or just like the entire sort of Texans wide receiver room. But I think Achane's up there as well because I think there are people that are particularly bullish on him. I think there are people that are saying to themselves, they have a more pragmatic approach where they're like, why would I go after a guy in the second round who some weeks might see 10 total touches because his offense is just that loaded and they don't need him to see much more than that because they might be hammering somebody 37-12.
And if that happens, he doesn't have the kind of body that they're going to put him out there to be a grinder to wear away the rest of the clock, right? That's not Devon Achane's game.
Like, of all the running backs that are being taken in the first, 15 of positional ADP, it's pretty clear that the one who has the lowest chance by far to be an every down workhorse for his team is Devon Achane, right? Because even a guy like Jahmyr Gibbs, who you could argue is the backup, like he might not start every game this season, be the first running back on the field. If something happens to David Montgomery, it's the Jahmyr Gibbs show. For Devon Achane, it certainly could be the Devon Achane show if something happens to Raheem Mostert. I also think it's going to be the Devon Achane show featuring Jeff Wilson Jr. and Jalen Wright. Right. So it's just different. But at the same time, he and Gibbs are the two guys that if they only average 15 touches per game are on the short list for the guys that could legitimately reach RB1 overall with a scaled down workload. Like Josh Jacobs only getting 15 opportunities a game ain't going to come anywhere close to running back one.
Yep.
For him to be one of the 5 best running backs in fantasy football this season, he needs to repeat what happened for much of his Vegas tenure, which was he was like Derrick Henry light in terms of workload there.
Yep.
So Achane and Gibbs are so interesting in that way where volume doesn't have to be their friend because the efficiency can be off every single chart that Mike Clay has ever made.
Yeah, his brain will explode if Devon Achane has this kind of a
I know.
season
Oh, my
again.
God.
Like,
It
that's
really
going to be
will.
one of those things. All right. Let's move into the 4th round of this mock draft and look at what we did here. Field, I kind of felt like I was at a spot. I'm not looking at running back anymore. Once we get to the 4th round, I think there was a big fall off, and you look at who came off the board. I took Devontae Smith at 37. We'll talk about that in a second. Travis Kelce at 38. Brandon Ayuk at 39. Jalen Waddle at 40, and then a bunch more people. Zay Flowers, Sam Laporta, Stephon Diggs, Calvin Ridley, Cooper Kupp, T. Higgins, Mark Andrews, and then Ramondre Stevenson at 48, the next running back to go. Everyone else loaded up in the 4th round with a bunch of wide receivers and skill position guys. I went with Devontae Smith. Just get him as my wide receiver 3, knowing what he can be in that offense. If anything happens to A.J. Brown, he would vault into a top 12 wide receiver very easily. But even if A.J. Brown is there, we've seen him still be very successful in that Eagles offense, and I love being able to get him as a wide receiver 3 for my offense.
Isn't it?
I thought about going with Jalen Waddle.
Yeah.
But then you went with Jalen Waddle.
I did, but Devontae, it's just what's the downside for Devontae Smith?
He doesn't have the same sexiness that I think some other
The
guys
most
do.
boring 4th-year awesome wide receiver.
Exactly. He is an awesome wide receiver, but it doesn't have the same zhuzh that some of these other guys have for some reason. I don't know why.
Maybe it's because he's the number 2 wide receiver on his team. Maybe it's because, the stench from last season for Philadelphia's offense down the
second
stretch.
half,
I don't have a good answer because he's awesome. He's money in the bank. He's super consistent over the course of this. Yes, he has the occasional down week, but over the course of the season, assuming he plays, if you tell me that Devontae Smith has at least 70 catches and at least 1,000 yards and at least 6 touchdowns, at least. I'm not saying at maximum, at least.
Yep.
I'd be like, yes, that's exactly right.
I wonder if the thing is people getting too in their head with the idea of, Jalen Hurts is going to steal a lot of touchdowns, and that's going to be a thing. They just brought in Saquon Barkley. He's going to touch the ball a ton, and they're not going to not throw to A.J. Brown. So is he maybe like the fourth fantasy option on this team? Maybe that's what people are thinking, but I just see talent.
Yeah, that's
and I
fair.
like Devonta Smith. So
Devontae goes 37 to you. Actually, I think the next 3 picks are all pretty interesting. Travis Kelce, first tight end off the board at 38. Again, he's going to go much earlier in a lot of drafts than 38. But in our leagues, he is tending to skew a little bit later because I think a lot of us here at ESPN Fantasy see the position as more closely clustered now than it has been for the past 7 years.
Basically.
And probably longer than that because we had peak Gronk and early Travis Kelce going at the same time. And those two for a while were, I mean, especially, at peak Gronk, even before Kelce came on the scene, it was like, you can't even see my arm. It's so far off the screen. This is a good arm.
Since 2016, Travis Kelce has 6 tight end 1 finishes, and he's never finished lower than tight end 3.
Ridiculous.
So it's just, I think eventually it gets to a point where, like with us, like you're talking about, this is as much about the rest of the tight ends catching up as it is potentially a fall off from Travis Kelce, right? This is about the rest of the position.
Yep. And then
Brandon Ayuk.
Yeah, and he goes next, which is interesting, in part because of the players that went subsequent to that. And I got Jalen Waddle as a result of this.
Yeah.
So at the time, I did not know that Jamar Chase was not going to show up to practice after this draft. But I acknowledge there was still some risk in drafting Jamar.
Yes.
So I felt a third receiver was important here. So I now have 1 running back, Travis Etienne, and 3 wideouts. So if Jamar Chase is not available to begin the season, my 2 starting wideouts are DJ Moore and Jalen Waddle, who not a bad pair right there. So that was my calculus was if there was a great running back available, I'd take him. But after I took Jalen Waddle, there's no running back taken until pick 48. So I was at 40 with Waddle. The next one off the board is Ramondre. Mike has referenced this running back dead zone, Daniel, and it seems pretty apparent. You go backwards here. DK Metcalf at 36 to Ramondre Stevenson at 48. There's no running back. So I guess I should have said Devon Achane 35 to Ramondre at 48. A 13-spot gap before the next running back is taken. We have reached that dead zone.
Yeah, we really have. And it felt to me like wait for me. I just wanted to wait. I would rather, if I get into this spot, this is just a Daniel Dopp thing, I'd rather wait and grab one of those other running backs a little farther down the list and load up on the other positions. Sure. Either grab a tight end, grab more wide receivers, have a quarterback that you really love. I'll tell you what, though. Let's move ahead and talk about the 5th round in this one. Because
no quarterback round, right?
Yeah, and the 5th round also didn't look all that different for running backs in this draft as well.
Yep.
Aaron Jones comes off the board at 49, and then we've got another big run of non-running backs for a little bit. Jalen Hurts to Tyler Fulgham at 50.
First quarterback taken.
Yep. Yeah, I was a little surprised by that. Yeah. George Pickens at 51, Anthony Richardson by Stephania at 52. We knew Stephania was in on the Anthony Richardson bandwagon.
Yep.
53 was Keith Lipscomb with Trey McBride, then Josh Allen, Patrick Mahomes, Chris Godwin. And then Fields, you decided to take a running back.
Yeah, that's
This
right.
spot decided to change it up. Went with DeAndre Swift, your second Chicago Bear.
That's right. So I took DeAndre Swift. So I'm Lou Malnati's. I am all in right now.
Love it.
It's a Chicago deep dish company for those that don't know, and it's terrific. Yes, DeAndre Swift, who, Daniel, there are some concerns here for Swift. I've talked about this. Like, he has never fully put it together for an extended period of time and, like, asserted himself as, like, I unequivocally deserve to be the lead guy, and my talent is in line with my production. Good season last year. Some great moments in Detroit as well. But as a Lions fan, you know what I am saying here.
100%.
That being said, like, for all the money, right? Legit contract. They're going to get in the football in the passing game as well. There's some upside there. And I felt like after taking 3 receivers in my first 4 picks, I needed to address that second running back spot because it was about to get thin in a hurry. And as a matter of fact, after DeAndre Swift, I only saw like 2 to 3 more running backs at max that I was like, all right, I could leave them with as my RB2, leave the draft with them as my RB2, and I'd feel like okay about things.
Yeah, Swift is getting close to that line of delineation for me, where if you can't grab a guy like that, I'm even going to wait a little bit farther and kind of do a hero RB build. Coming up after Swift, Lamar Jackson and C.J. Stroud. So how many quarterbacks did we have
6
here?
in this round.
6 quarterbacks in this round. Jalen Hurts, Anthony Richardson, Josh Allen, Patrick Mahomes, Lamar Jackson, and C.J. Stroud. And then at 60, I took Rashee Rice.
Yep, who's been climbing up the board steadily. You talked about him at length as one of your players rising up yesterday as well. So you got to feel good about him at 60.
Absolutely, and we got news that the NFL obviously was not going to hand down a suspension right now. They're going to let the situation play out and see what happens there. Obviously, we don't know what that is.
Yeah, it could play out tomorrow.
Exactly.
It also might not play out until January or February.
And so without knowing, for me, I was like, all right, let me grab my third wide receiver here. I was very good on that. Or excuse me, fourth wide receiver here. And I thought the value on getting a guy that could be a top 15, top 20 wide receiver in the 5th round.
It's a great pick.
Was too good for me to hold off on. Was there any pick that stood out to you, though, that was surprising in this round?
I was surprised by 6 quarterbacks.
Yeah.
I'm not surprised. We've been doing this with largely this group since June. You're going to see some variance. Like, on average, like if we were just doing one draft, my guess is that if Tyler Fulgham was to begin the quarterback run, well, our guy, we love our guy. Tyler.
I love Tyler.
Tyler might do anything.
Yeah.
Right? Like, Tyler will do anything. But, whoever started the quarterback run, in general, I would expect it to be Josh Allen. So it is surprise. It's a touch surprising, but not shocking by any measure that it's Jalen Hurts. And by the way,
Jalen Hurts,
not like Jalen Hurts, 15 rushing touchdowns last season, a totally justifiable QB1 off the board. But I was surprised 6 went. But what you're going to notice here, what I suspect is once those first 6 went, is that the rest of us that did not take a quarterback, we're just going to chill for a while.
Yep.
Because we know the number of quarterbacks that we identify as starting level, and we're comfortable with taking them later. And I was certainly going to be patient, and you'll find out just how patient I was.
Yeah, same with me. All right, let's move ahead and talk about round 6 then. I went back-to-back in this 5th and 6th round, going Rashee Rice, like I said, in the 5th and the 6th. I took Evan Ingram. I thought there was a spot where I finally needed to be able to grab a tight end. I was looking at who I could potentially grab here, and I liked him. Like he set the record last year, 116 receptions. I think he's going to continue to be awesome in this Jaguars offense. To be honest, being able to round out the rest of my roster is what I'm starting to look at here now that I'm in the 6th round. I've grabbed enough wide receivers at this point in my mind. I'll mention that, though, a little bit later on in the draft. We coming up next, Tank Dell, and then Dalton Kincaid to Pierre Baquet, and then you went James Conner at the running back spot, Field.
Yeah, so I guess I told you a little while ago, there was only like 1 or 2 running backs that I felt good about when I was on the clock with DeAndre Swift available.
Yep.
I thought James Conner might be gone by the time that I picked at number 64. So I thought if I bypass Swift, I might miss out on both of these guys by 64. Conner falls into my lap. He is taken about where he is often going at pick number 64. And this was, Daniel, the run of sort of that next tier of running backs, but no quarterbacks, right? All of a sudden we go from 6 quarterbacks in one round to 0 in the next.
Yeah, it's running backs and tight ends in this round is what it was. So we had Evan Ingram, Tank Dell, Dalton Kincaid, James Conner, and then another tight end, Kyle Pitts, Deontay Johnson, your guy Javonte Williams, Terry McLaurin, then George Kittle, David Montgomery, Najee Harris, and then Amari Cooper. A decided fall there at the running back spot, though, from the guys we were talking about earlier.
I would agree. I was sitting here and I was looking at the players that are taken in this round where you're like, who has league-winning upside in this round? And there are not a ton of guys that fit that bill as I'm looking at the list right now. I think there are 2 that kind of do stand out, though. And do you have guesses?
I got to. Well, I'm curious. I think Dalton Kincaid is one of them.
Yep, and Tank Dell. Those are the 2 that I picked.
Totally
and
agree.
I've expressed the concern surrounding Tank Dell, and concern's not the right word, but we've expressed the reality of being a third wide receiver, right?
Yep.
But he's 1 injury away from starting in the lead offense, like crazy upside there, right? The other one is Dalton Kincaid. Well, I don't know if we've talked enough about Dalton Kincaid this month. For all the mystery surrounding who will be the Bills' wide receiver 1, the answer might just be number 86 who plays tight end instead.
It could be the same thing that Patrick Mahomes has been doing with Travis Kelce for a minute, where he is the guy that Josh Allen locks onto. I said it a couple days ago, but I would not be shocked if Dalton Kincaid pushed for triple-digit receptions this year in this offense.
It's a great call. It's a terrific call. I mean, he is at 70-plus last year as a rookie when they had Stephon Diggs. And we always say, like, when they had Stephon Diggs and Gabe Davis, let's be honest, people. Gabe Davis was up and down and up and down and up and down for the Bills. Like, when they had Stephon Diggs, who was dominating targets for much of his 4 seasons with Buffalo. So Dalton Kincaid, like a fascinating flyer to be taking, a great pick there for Pierre, who, well, Pierre, I think Pierre's Canadian. I think his place of birth is closer to Buffalo than it is to Green Bay. He is a Packers fan.
He is a Packers fan, correct? Yeah,
A little bit of.
I believe his wife is.
But I think his wife loves the Bills, so he's keeping the boss happy.
That's right. That's the right way to look at it, Field.
All right,
Yeah.
great.
Bunch of tight ends, though, like I said.
Yep.
Ingram, Kincaid, Kyle Pitts, and George Kittle. 4 tight ends come off the board here.
Yep.
Once you get to that spot, you're starting to look at that, tight end dead zone. You got a few more that you can consider, but we're getting real close. Let's go ahead and move ahead and look at round 7.
Yeah, about to get maniacal on my front here.
Yeah. I had some things come up here at this point.
Yep.
Started off with Christian Kirk, Tony Pollard, Dak Prescott, who Matt Bowen has loved Dak Prescott if you've watched any of our mock draft exercises. Brian Robinson Jr. to Stephania Bell, Kyler Murray, Jake Ferguson, Tajay Spears, and Zamir White. And then Fields, you're on the board again after a couple of running backs, quarterbacks, and tight ends come off. Which direction did you decide to go?
Yeah, so again, I felt here no quarterback was in play for me. I felt like there was still options that were going to be available in later rounds. 12-team league, 13 quarterbacks I like.
Yep.
I could be patient. And I did not expect anybody to double dip.
At least not early.
Yeah, I would say, and I don't want people to think that we are doing things for shtick or gimmick when we're doing these mock drafts. But when you do a ton of mock drafts, you also find yourself at times wanting to diversify your portfolio, right? You don't want to do the same thing over and over and over and over again in mocks or real drafts, because if you play in 10 leagues and you target the same players in all 10 leagues, your results in those 10 leagues is probably going to be pretty stagnant, right? You either have a good team or you probably have a pretty bad team. So, yeah, it's human nature for us to want to mix things up a little bit. I don't target guys that I don't love often, but like you and I know, like we talked about this last week. Like, we're in a draft together, the Michigan Men League, where I took Nico Collins when Stephon Diggs was still on the board.
That made me very mad.
Pretty early for Nico, right?
Yeah. Yep.
I like Nico. He's like my wide receiver 18. It's just when pressed to choose between one or the other in a one-league scenario, I have drifted towards Stephon. So the reason why I mention all that is I didn't have a ton of exposure to Keenan Allen during the mock draft process.
Ooh, okay.
And so here I am, pick number 81. I chose between him and Rome Odunze, and I said, Rome is so tantalizing because he's so talented. But I kind of think Keenan Allen is going to start the season as the go-to guy, not named DJ Moore in that Chicago offense.
He's been a pretty good wide receiver in the NFL for a very long time, Field. It's not like there's not reasons to believe that. Grabbing that third Bear for your team. And then right after that, we just mentioned it, noted Packers lover Pierre Biquet took Christian Watson.
Pierre just texted me, and I completely, A, I was wrong. B, I had no idea. Where was Pierre born?
Pierre was born in France.
How the heck did you know that? And I had Pierre. That makes more sense now.
Yeah.
Well, I thought he was a French Canadian.
No.
Raised in Toronto. He just texted me. He was raised in Toronto, but born in France.
Yes.
I learned something new today, and I apologize to Pierre for not knowing that previously.
How dare you?
Yeah.
How dare you? Pierre, though, going with Christian Watson, and then Jalen Warren, and then I decided to finally end my quarterback run where I didn't have one. I went with Jordan Love. I love what Jordan Love did last year. Hey, and listen, if you listen back to the show, you and I were both nervous about how we started the season with a number of different things, but he proved me wrong as the season went on. He looked absolutely fantastic. I will own that. I came around to Jordan Love in a major way towards the second half of the year, and I think this year in all of our drafts, if he's one of those guys that I can grab as my starting quarterback, I have no trepidation being able to do that. I think this offense for Green Bay is going to be another fantastic year.
Totally.
So I loved being able to grab Jordan Love. And now we're going to talk about the 8th round.
Okay.
And this is where I made a mistake. I just want to say that, Field, I messed up.
Why?
Because I thought that someone was going to be able to fall to me after this pick. I decided to wait.
Okay.
I went with Jaden Reed, my guy. I've been talking up Jaden Reed. I love Jaden Reed this year.
Yeah.
Grabbed another wide receiver, my second bench wide receiver before grabbing my second running back. I'm going to let you know how that turns out in just a little bit. Look at who else came off the board after I took Jaden Reed, whom I loved. We got Cortland Sutton, Brian Thomas. Field, I'm sorry. Does that say Rome Odunze?
Sure
Did you draft your 4th Chicago Bear in this draft?
I did. My 3rd Bears receiver as well.
Is that on purpose?
No. But for a bench spot, I've said to myself that I think the Bears receiver room is going to be very profitable.
Yeah.
It's just I don't know exactly how the profits are earned. The most likely path is DJ Moore and Keenan Allen have good seasons. I've got that covered. The second most likely path would be, I don't want to imagine, is Rome Odunze so good that he just overtakes Keenan Allen.
Sure.
The third path, and I don't like to say this out loud, someone gets injured amongst the first two.
Yep.
And then you have Rome Odunze step into a top 2 wide receiver role. I now have all my bases covered there in Chicago.
Yep. And this is a guy that you're drafting now, like we're talking about. This is the 8th round.
88th pick. Yeah. No harm, no foul.
That's great value there. At 89, Joe Burrow, 90. Chase Brown, Devin Singletary, Jackson Smith and Jigba, Xavier Worthy to Stephania Bell, Keon Coleman, and then Raheem Mostert and Ezekiel Elliott. Handful of running backs there that are pretty nice. If you're looking at a guy that fell, Chase Brown, moving up draft boards, Field Yates. I was expecting to see him a little bit later in the draft, but to be honest.
Is that a forecast that he was one of the backs you wanted?
He was one of the guys that I was looking at, either him or Zach Moss. We'll talk about him in a minute.
RB strategy you regretted based off of the fact that a couple of those guys went.
A couple of these guys went and a few more in the 9th round. But nothing crazy here in the 8th round. Nothing stood out as though like this is with a crazy pick or unbelievable value, to be honest. I think you might have had the best value.
Well, you're seeing a lot of upside plays here, right? If you look at this, right, like Aiden Reed, Brian Thomas Jr., Rome Odunze, JSN,
Xavier
Worthy, Keon Coleman, Raheem Mostert are all like upside plays, right? You've got a couple of the more boring types, right? Devin Singletary, Zeke Elliott. I don't think either of those guys is going to like crush it with like, Zeke could have a lot of touchdowns. I don't think Zeke's going to rush for like 1,200 yards and 10 touchdowns. Yeah. He might get to 10 touchdowns, but like on 700 yards.
Right. Double-digit touchdown seems more in the cards than 1,200.
Would agree. Yep.
Absolutely.
Devin Singletary is going to be fine as a depth level back, but we've gotten to the point now where like you are clearly drafting a type as opposed to a specific player.
Yep. Hey, it's all about roster construction, right? Looking at what you need for your team based on what you have already grabbed. But 8th round, very interesting. Let's move ahead and look at the 9th round of this mock draft. I did not like the 9th round, Field.
All right.
It really hurt me a lot.
Yep.
Zach Moss, Eric Carabell, Hollywood Brown, and then Austin Eckler, Jerome Ford, J.K. Dobbins, Jonathan Brooks, Chuba Hubbard, then Jaden Daniels. Ooh. And you decided at that point, Field, you got to stop your quarterback slide, and you ended up going with Brock Purdy.
That's right. Yeah, I felt okay about this one. I actually, I probably should have taken Caleb Williams to really commit to the bit. He was still available. These are sort of two of the final guys in my top 13 of quarterbacks. But I went with Brock, the lesser upside player than Caleb Williams. But I think the known quantity, you could tip the scale in the favor of Brock if you're trying to win right away and not have a much lower chance of having to pivot from your quarterback. Brock would give you that. So get my quarterback in round 9. Still feels like actually a little bit early to be closing the quarterback run in one of the mock drafts amongst our ESPN fantasy staffers. But Brock is going to have just another predictable close to 4,000 yards, 25 to 30 passing touchdowns, probably do a good job of protecting the football and add a touch, not a lot, but just a touch with his legs as well.
I would love to have Trent Williams back with that team. That would make me feel a little bit better. If he had
I think that one gets done still.
I really hope so.
I think it gets
really done. Hope so.
So you end up taking a running back finally.
I did, but I didn't like it. Ladd McConkey went next, and then Gus Edwards to Tristan Cockcroft, and then I'm on the board. And at that point, Field, all of the starting running backs that I was looking at for my hero RB build, which I'm going to mention once again, it was Chase Brown, it was Zach Moss, it was Jerome Ford, it was Chuba Hubbard, and it was Gus Edwards. I had 5 guys that I was like, one of these guys is going to make its way back to me to be able to do my hero RB build. Instead, all 5 of those starters went, and I was left in a spot where I had to literally draft a backup running back if I just wanted to have an RB2. There was nobody else that was a starter at this point in the draft. I'm very grateful this was a mock draft and not a real draft because I would have been very frustrated. But this is part of why we do it, because those drafts that we did with all of our colleagues during the season, they were 10-team leagues. Yep. This was a 12-team mock draft, so things turned out a little bit different than what I had expected. I went with Zach Charbonnet, just trying to find someone that could potentially have some value. I actually doubled up. We'll talk about who I took in the 10th in just a minute.
Defend you, though. The hero RB build can be kind of fun for this reason. Winning is really fun in fantasy football. I think trading is like on the short list for best things you can do in fantasy football. I referenced this league yesterday on the show about how I went maniacal, and we're in a league now where I've got 8 of the best, 42 to 45 receivers in the league.
That's true.
In the 12-team league, I've got 8 of them. That's a very robust number.
Yep.
Nothing has gotten past the goal line yet, but I think I've talked to every other of the 11 members in the league about some sort of trade. And something will get done. I will find a way to balance my roster. So while you are very short on running backs right now, unless like the entire league is like, we are intent on making Daniel Dopp start Zach Charbonnet in week 1.
You know what?
You'll find a deal.
If that happens, that's collusion, Field.
Yeah, that's collusion.
That's
We don't stand for collusion.
Yeah. All right. Let's look at round 10 of this 12-team mock draft we did yesterday here at ESPN Fantasy. I said, I got to grab another running back. This is part of the Hero RB build. When you don't get a guy that is a starter, you're just going to load up on a bunch of running backs that could have some potential. Ty Chandler, we've been talking about him. I am not quite as high on Aaron Jones as Stefania is. I understand where she's coming at with Aaron Jones. I would just rather go a different direction. And so for me, being able to grab that backup and see what Ty Chandler could do. He had a couple of nice games last year when finally given the opportunity. He just did not get a lot of touches and didn't get a lot of run as the starter in that Vikings offense. But when you saw it, it was not bad, and someone that I'm hoping could turn into a decent RB2 for me as a part of this Hero RB build. Coming up after that, we had Jordan Addison, my guy Jamison Williams. Shout out Pierre, taking a Detroit Lion. Appreciate that. And then you went with your tight end. You waited until the 10th round of this 12-team draft and still got David Njoku as your starting tight end.
Yeah, I've been saying about how there's like 10 tight ends that I feel pretty good about being starting tight ends going into the season. And if I'm not mistaken, the last of those that was available was David Njoku. Let me just want to make sure I thought I saw. Yeah, that's right.
Yep.
Because I already saw Jake Ferguson go off the board. So I admittedly did wait a while. But to get, Jake Ferguson went 78th in this mock draft. David Njoku, I have ranked higher. I got him 112th. I feel great about this one. I have not yet figured out the reason why Njoku is lasting so long on boards.
Wow, 78 to 112 was the gap between tight ends.
By the way, that wasn't a bad pick by Moody at number 78.
No.
I like Jake Ferguson too, but to get Njoku, quick math, I think that gets me to 34 picks later. That was probably bad math, but whatever. Whatever 112 minus 78 is. Yeah. 34 picks later. It's pretty good gap. Pretty good value right there.
I think that's really good value, honestly. If you don't want to say it, I'll say it. I think that's really good value at the tight end spot to be able to get him based on where everyone else got a tight end.
How about J-Mo, though? And I was watching this morning. I was watching people tweet who are actually sitting there listening to Ray Agnew, who is the Lions assistant GM, very well regarded, and everybody is going out of their way to talk about how it's the year of J-Mo. You're a Lions fan. You are invested in J-Mo, both in the real world. Also, yes. I know you have some dynasty shares or other shares of J-Mo.
Yep.
Are you buying it, or are you feeling more and more like, are you feeling like this could be sort of typical off-season optimism from a team?
I think it is. You have to be. I think you can't not think this. It has to be off-season optimism because you're not going to say bad things about, I guess unless you're the Saints and you're talking about Kendre Miller.
Yeah.
But, you're not going to say bad things about a young player that you still want to do well in your offense. They used a high first-round pick on Jamison Williams.
Yep.
I think that this is a situation in which the team is saying things. They want to speak it into existence, but also they are putting their money where their mouth is. They didn't add anybody at the wide receiver spot through free agency and through the draft up until we get to cut-down days.
Yep.
They just recently added Tim Patrick. They signed Allen Robinson, Tyler Fulgham's guy, and then we're going to bring back Donovan Peoples-Jones. But Jamison Williams should have a very big role within this offense. The question is, what is that role honestly going to look like once he steps on the field?
Yeah, and the thing is that, they can, both sides can be right. The Lions can be right. Jamison Williams can have a much more impactful role. It also might not be a very fantasy-friendly role, right? So, a fantasy-friendly role for Jamison Williams might be 8 targets a game. Whereas, a higher impact role for J-Mo this year might be that he has some games with 7 targets and then some with 5, but they're making the targets count a lot.
Right.
I don't know. It's a fascinating. He's a fascinating player this season.
What I don't want him to be, and I mean no disrespect when I say this, but I don't want him to be Gabe Davis.
Yeah, or Marquez Valdez-Scantling.
Exactly.
One of those types, right?
He's got to be utilized more underneath, find more ways to be able to get targets than just be a deep threat that maybe gets a handful of targets, and he'll have a handful of big games. But if you're going to draft him, and where you're drafting him here in the 10th round, this is fine. There's nothing wrong with that at all. But if he's going to really pan out, he's going to have to do more than just be that deep threat. All right, Field, we only got 8 minutes left in the show.
Try to get through a round or two.
We don't really have enough time. Why don't you talk about a couple? Can we just look at your team? Just look at your team overall as a whole.
Let's do it.
You did draft one more Chicago Bear. I don't think you meant to draft 5 Chicago Bears in this mock draft.
I'm in on it, yeah. I've got all the Bears running backs and all the Bears wide receivers.
Bear down, right? Why
Bear down,
not?
baby. Yeah, I would say this, I actually pulled up. I'm going to.
Yeah. What are your takeaways? Takeaways from a 12
So
team.
my takeaways are that like I'm a little more nervous about Jamar than I was yesterday, right? Like I didn't love.
Got your team up here on the full
that
screen in
news
case
there.
anyone's watching at home.
So I went wide receiver heavy early as a result of that, right? That is like the not specific to knowing Jamar news, but it was just like, hey, you got to hedge a tiny bit, right?
Right.
I love the values for me at quarterback and tight end. I loved it. I had zero issue whatsoever with the two players that I ended up with, Brock Purdy and David Njoku, getting them in round 9 and round 10. And then I went young on the backside, right?
Yep.
There's really like the most veteran player on my bench. I guess Keenan Allen would be it, but Keenan might be a starter for me.
Sure.
Most veteran player on my bench besides that is Jerry Jeudy. I just went young bucks, upside, right? And Jeudy. It's totally fair to wonder whether Jerry Jeudy is going to become anything in Cleveland. I thought a change of scenery was very good and necessary. And the Browns have eyes on plans for Jeudy. So while he has, at least to my knowledge, not generated a ton of like heat or steam during the preseason, you know, I've contemplated the possibility of Jerry Jeudy taking a step forward here.
He's such an interesting situation, right? Because we also expected him to hopefully do a little bit more in Denver, but then he comes over to Cleveland, and Cleveland pays him real money. Amari Cooper's days in
You know
Cleveland.
what's funny is now, like $15 million a year for Jerry
I know.
Jeudy is like
Feels
below
great.
average wide receiver.
Feels great, yeah.
Crazy, right?
But Amari Cooper's not going to be there forever. They paid him to be the face of this wide receiving core eventually once Cooper, is no longer here.
Yep. Final year for Cooper's contract as things presently stand.
I did see we did get a Deshaun Watson update on his contract. I don't know if that's going to change anything for the franchise at all, but there was
They had a lot more cap space to work with.
I saw that.
Yeah, this is what the Browns do. They push money into the future, and Deshaun, it's a notable deal, obviously, because the contract fully guaranteed, and through 2 seasons has not worked out as planned. But this is a make or break year. Deshaun, speaking of a guy who will be one of the defining players of this season, I think Deshaun, in the real world, might be on the very short list, along with the Dak Prescotts of the world, who we'll be discussing one way or the other prominently pretty much every day once we've gotten through a course of this season.
Agreed.
How about you?
All right,
what
looking
are
at my
your
team,
takeaways? Yeah.
and I mentioned it earlier, but I was just thrilled that I was able to get Garrett Wilson and Jahmyr Gibbs. I thought that was a really great start for me. Getting a premier running back, premier wide receiver, love doing that. Loaded up. Just took a bunch of wide receivers early. DK Metcalf. So wide receivers are Garrett Wilson, DK Metcalf, Devontae Smith, Rashee Rice, and Jaden Reed. Those are my 5 wide receivers to pair with Evan Engram as my tight end and Jordan Love at quarterback. The problem is I hate my running backs. Just absolutely don't enjoy my running backs. I thought I'd be able to get either Jerome Ford and or Chuba Hubbard at that 9-10 turn, who I talked about. I talked about it yesterday on the show, Field. That was the problem. People listen to me when I'm talking about, this is too low for these guys. And then my colleagues come in and they snipe me.
Very rude of them.
It was very rude of them.
Really, like no one's thinking for you right now, thinking about Daniel right now, and that's kind of screwed up.
I did load up on a bunch of backup running backs with the hopes that one of them would get the starting gig later on in the season, but I really like how my team turned out outside of the running back
Grade
spot.
someone, yeah.
I can't believe, though, that Mike Clay and the grade that I get afterwards, he gave me a D.
A D?
Which I think was for dangerous. You got a dangerous team is what that is.
These
yeah.
grades are hilarious. I love them. It's great. A's are hard to come by, so if you get one, take a lot of solace.
Yeah, take a screenshot of it because you're not going to get very many of them.
There are very few. I have noticed that so far. A lot. Like I have been in leagues where we shared it as a group after our Michigan men draft. Where
Yes.
1 of 10 people got a 10 or 12. 1 of 10,
10.
got an A.
Yeah.
So we are apparently we are grading on a curve. Is that right?
Yeah, well,
We are
Mike is
grading
always
partially.
grading our teams. I haven't gotten a single A from Mike Clay yet. I don't know if you've gotten any in maybe in one of those mock drafts we did that I didn't check. But
Mike, who is probably in the lab right now processing punter projections for Week 7. If you hear this, you owe Daniel an apology.
you really do, Mike. Yeah. You really do, Mike.
Lighten up, will ya?
Please. The one thing that I didn't do that I regret is I took Jake Moody from my kicker when Jake Bates was still on the board. But can I tell you why?
Thought it was a different Jake.
No. It's because I didn't want to be someone that took too many players from one team. Little did I know you were loading up on the Bears. I absolutely could have taken a 4th Detroit Lion.
I was trying to show you up.
That's exactly what it was.
And that's what I did.
That's exactly what
My
happened.
5 Bears overtook your 4 Lions.
I think this was a very
What happened
interesting.
if 5 Bears fought 4 Lions in real life?
Oh my goodness! Is this an all fantasy everything conversation?
Yes, good call.
I think so.
God.
I think so.
Recent listener to this pod.
That's right.
Told me about like 5 days ago.
Just a little bit ago, yeah. I think my biggest takeaway was knowing that there is a substantial difference. And, like, we know this, like, because we've done it. But, like, if you're in both 10 and 12-team leagues, maybe you only have 2 or 3 drafts, and one of them is a 12-team and the other one is 2 10-teams, it is very important to do a 12-team mock draft because there's a number of players that come out of that player pool earlier than you expect. And that's something that you've just got to plan on being able to figure out, how do I pivot?
Yeah.
How is my strategy a little bit different? It might not seem like a lot, but 2 extra guys per round adds up pretty quickly, Field.
Sure, it sure does, Daniel, and I really felt it at that tight end spot.
Yep.
And that was my threshold was David Njoku, but if I can get him, like,
You got, I don't want to say lucky, but
no, I got lucky. I mean, someone could have double dipped there, and if you take a Brock Bowers, who's got so much upside, but also like he could be the third pass catcher on an offense that might not be very good.
might not be good.
So,
Exactly.
it's a fascinating difference between 10 and 12-team leagues.
Yeah. All right, we got one more day, one more show for you until the biggest draft weekend of the year. We love you guys. Thank you so much for hanging out with us. Don't forget to love each other. Be kind to yourself. And don't forget, Fantasy Focus Football is presented by NFL Sunday Ticket on YouTube TV. We'll see you guys tomorrow.
Thank you for not making fun of me for spilling water during the show.
I didn't even see it. Really?
I'm a mess over here.
Oh, my gosh. There's water everywhere. Usually it's Mike that we make fun of.
You're in the 06010.